That just still blows my mind. Yeah. Because I was able to connect with Joseph Mika on there. With Doge and then start, and there was a green startup.
We need to. Okay, let's. That right is called the infinity of hangouts.
Oh yeah.
I was going in.
Yeah. Does that work? Okay.
You are.
Then you can take your laptop up there on the podium and
Yeah, here's your connection.
oh, we can put power there too.
Okay. So with this, we'll just share your desktop, and then you can kind of just minimize that.
Yeah.
Then you can whatever you show will show on there, and it'll show on.
Right here, you plug into that black one. Should be power. Sweet.
And that is
Now the next thing you need to help me do. Yeah. You know,
Just in
convince
case.
so you need to put some kind of
good luck.
over these skylights.
So this doesn't wash out.
Yeah. I was down to
Hey, so are we still sharing with the SCG Utah Twitter thing?
I don't know, I emailed that to Brandon.
I didn't know if you knew if we were still, because people had posted like pictures of Crystal at some symposium.
Oh, to the SCG Utah?
Yeah, there was pictures of her.
We should be, and I know it's still, I think we were transferring everything over to the SCG consulting one. But I told Brandon to go in and fix that and then see.
Because we should be able to, we should get a set that
attendances we have
where
we
we
submit every 2 weeks, so
it's automatically the tweets over to
For everybody
That's
else.
true, I'll ask Brandon and make sure
Okay.
that.
email it out to other people, because they email it out to, we call it like a external like tech, like Utah tech. Yeah, like most people that show up every day. They're like about 40 people, 30 to 40 people. So much better for us.
So,
Yeah.
so
Oh.
it's hard.
Oh.
Yeah.
Hey,
Have you met Alan?
we going, Dan?
Dan?
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Alan?
Yeah. Nice to meet you.
I need to, what I need to do is like go through all the information that you gave me and then.
I think so, power on.
I have to do and like, and then present that to.
Sure, there's some code for America. They don't know what all they started an annual which is a big in summer. It's just really bad. And as a group, we started really using that as a kickoff summer long training / hackathon series. So Chrome development training series, training series, associate learners, and mountain series. But then groups are developing applications based on and there will be a final review. Sorry, so that's the
Hey, strangers, how are you? Good to see you again. So Jonathan's telling me about this awesome opportunity that you get involved with and learn about it. Basically, a huge training series that they're doing. And there's, so you're a JavaScript user group, local JavaScript user group?
This is much bigger. So, have you heard of Code for America? Okay, so there's a BrownBag side we have one. This is service Code for America initiative. There's an annual hackathon associated with it. There are local branches. Local branches side we didn't really have a full hackathon. That as a group we would rather have a series of trainings and opportunities for people over a period of time. So and so the annual hackathon, we decided to use it to kick off.
I don't have genetic focus for work.
But we can all work together to also. And so that's in late August.
I actually hate that.
So like a long term, not like go down.
I know, but I hate that. I was right always.
So they can use those for states that want to.
Prizes are a big one right now, and different events are also.
Well, my son,
But the big one is prizes.
do you have a dollar for money?
What?
No, I'm really happy for it, but I just want to know if that was
Hey, Ryan, are you sharing your desktop
Yeah.
on Google Hangouts? I'm not seeing it over here.
It says I'm presenting to everyone.
Say desktop.
There is an ongoing Slack channel that goes in. And so it's probably
A couple of heads up with font size. If you want to talk about the font size.
That's what I'm trying to do.
Hey, back. Hey, how you doing? Feel good? Enjoy this today?
Yeah.
Think so.
Oh, okay. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for let us know about that. I hope you enjoy it.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's better. I need some water.
Yeah, there's cups over there. Oh yeah, here we go. How many rounds? Right now, I'm transitioning to definition from Java. Got on top. You put all this stuff on. Yeah, you can start with this. I guess the first 2 weeks I got really, it's actually. How long is still good? Are you considering trying that? Oh. So it should have totally That's when you do that. So the judge. So then you do this stuff. So almost, I think like 6 hours, especially if we're some of that's technique. So if you put it on the end, be able to go to the pressure that and shove it. So now it's right. Yeah, no, I mean, that's really, it's not that easy. If you can use all of those. You like those? On that point, it really doesn't
Like literally. They wanted classes. I was supposed to be out for 4 years. It's not necessary. My deal was that it's gonna sound way better than some dude talking to me. So the idea was initially like, oh, well, there's a bunch of, but it's not. So well, there's a bunch of languages never interested. So scientists like this is amazing. We can like not just do this for some people, but do this for everything. So how do they? So
All right, guys, we'll get started in a sec. We're still waiting on pizza, I guess. Probably good to get you guys eating before we get going. Go check on that and everybody's hanging out. Oh, I'll sit down with Deb.
Yeah, I'm glad you did
Anything else?
Learn.
No, your headlight.
Oh,
projector.
No, you're good.
Hey, Sean. I got dismissed. Coming back to work.
Okay, these are all the same. Got a few more coming, so if you guys want to start digging in, go for it. Good.
Yeah, that's my. One of us all the same.
I got the last one because they scheduled a lunch meeting. Huh?
Yeah.
I found out all of them except the last one, and no one else has ever come. I can't eat pizza.
Another cheese.
I don't eat. Pizza's real good though. Pizza's real good though. I remember. I know cauliflower.
Flower selling, how many of you guys are here for the first time for this series? Okay, so we missed a whole bunch. This is like our last of our JavaScript series. And we'll be talking about testing tonight. For those of you that don't know, you can't actually test JavaScript. So we'll be talking about that. And Ryan Moore is presenting. Ryan's been, how long have you been with the company now?
3 years?
3 years, yeah. He's been around. Excellent developer. He's been learned a lot. He's done a lot in different languages between Grails and Java, JavaScript, and a bunch of stuff. So he's presenting today, and as always, if you guys have questions or whatever, feel free to throw them out, and we'll try to answer them as best we can. And we'll get started here probably now, so we can get everybody out of here by 1. So, okay, you all good? Get up and grab pizza. Don't feel shy.
Well, hey everybody, my name's Ryan, and today we're going to be talking about everybody's favorite thing, testing, especially with JavaScript. And yeah, Dan gave you a little bit of my background. So most of the work that I'm doing currently is doing a full stack development with the LDS Church, and we use a Spring backend with the REST API, and then we pretty much use Angular on the front end, and have a few apps that are on Backbone as well. So today, my goals are that we're going to talk about, first off, what I call the first line of defense, which is linting and code style tools that you can use before you even start testing, just to make sure that your code is, and your team's code is sort of dealing with your project style guide. You're not forgetting semicolons where they should be, and everything is laid out nicely. And also how to automate that with Gulp. And then we're going to go into using Jasmine, which is a testing framework, to test some vanilla JavaScript. And then we're going to try to do some Angular stuff. And to be honest, I am not an expert at this stuff. I'm trying real hard to get it. And so we're going to work through it, but especially with some of the async stuff that happens in JavaScript, it can be a little bit difficult to stay on top of. I would like to tell you that the things that Google says on the Angular website, the testing is super easy and everything else is true, but once you get past some of the initial examples that they have there, it can get pretty hairy. But I wanted to get a feel for y'all. So how many of you are JavaScript developers? Everybody? Lots of people? And how many of you test? Cool. And yeah, in JavaScript. Yeah. And what, so maybe we can just go around for the people who test. I just like to get a feel of what sort of tools you use. So for those of you that do test in JavaScript, can you just take a second and talk about the tools and setup that you have in your projects? Yeah, sure.
Primarily I use Karma, Webpack, Babel.
Okay.
Kind of a number of things, but
Cool. We'll be doing some Karma today with Angular. And anybody else?
So we're really simple. We just use Mocha, but we also don't have GUI front end, so I'm kind of interested in how you handle all that.
Cool. So are you primarily using Node then?
Yes.
Okay. And anybody else? All right. Okay. So let's jump right into it. So in order to begin testing JavaScript, you're going to need some tools. And so the first one that you're going to need is Node. And so even if you don't have any Node actual code, we're going to use Node to manage the tools that we use to test and CodeLint and CodeHint. And so you're going to need Node. And so to install that, you're going to go to the Node website, download, extract the code, and add it to your path. Just fairly simple. And then the next tool I'm going to talk about real quick, just for some background, is NPM. So NPM is a package management tool. It's included with Node, and it has some basic commands that we're going to want to talk about. The first one is npm install. If you run npm install without any arguments, what it goes ahead and does is it installs any modules that you've listed as dependencies in a package.json file. Then we have npm install, and then if you put a module name like JSHint is one that we're going to be using, or gulp JSHint, that will go ahead and get that module and copy it into a node modules directory in the current directory that you're in. Now, if you add onto the end of that npm install --save with the module name, what that's going to do is it's going to go ahead, grab that module, and save it in the node modules directory. It's also going to add it to your package.json file. And so when anybody runs the npm install command in the future, it will install that module without them having to explicitly state it. And then we have npm install -save dev, and with a module name. And what this does is it does the same thing as the previous command, but instead of saving it in the dependencies property of your package.json, it goes ahead and it saves it in a dev dependencies property. And that's mainly what we're going to be using today, because those are modules that will not be used used in production. They'll only be used in development mode. So the next tool we're going to talk about is Gulp. And we're not going to go into a ton of detail on Gulp, but Gulp is basically a tool that allows you to run tasks, JavaScript tasks. And what we're going to use it today is to use it for code style checking and code linting, that sort of basic line of defense that I talked about. And so to install gulp locally, that's going to be a dev dependency, not a production dependency. So you just run npm install --save--dev gulp in your project directory. And that gives you gulp. Now, gulp uses a file called gulpfile.js to go ahead and run tasks. And the way that this is set up is up at the top, we declare the modules that we're going to be using. And in order for these to show up correctly, you need to make sure that they are installed as node modules in your project directory. And so for each one of these, you would need to run npm install --save-dev gulp, and the same thing for gulp-jscs, which is a gulp plugin to help run the JavaScript code style tool, and for each of these. The only ones that are really super important for us today are the JSHint and JSCS, and the stylish. Print is just a utility to help print out some statements to the command line when you're running this, and I have a Node API running, and that gulp nodemon is just there to serve up the application and rerun it when changes occur. So then the next thing that I want you to look at is this gulp.task-ved. So the way that you set up tasks that gulp can run is by running the gulp.task function, and it takes in the first argument here is just a string that is a name that you can give to any of the tasks, and that's what you're going to use to identify the task when you run it. And then the second argument is a function, and basically we just return gulp, and then the first thing that we do is we run the source, and what this does is it tells gulp what files it's going to watch and run the following tasks on, and what files it isn't going to. So I include all of my source files here, and also JavaScript files in my home directory. So the second one, the JavaScript in my home directory, that's to actually watch just this gulp file and some other configuration files that I have for some different tools to make sure that they're also compliant with my style guide. And then this gulp print just prints out to the command line exactly what files it catches. And then I simply run through the JSCS, the JSHint process, and this reporter is an option that gets added onto JSHint to sort of tell us how we want to have errors printed out to us. And then finally I say that if the reporter catches any fails, I actually want this process to stop. So later on, if I have this serve it up task, that if my JSHint process fails, then it's actually going to catch it and prevent it from continuing, so that I'm forced to deal with those before committing bad code that all my teammates yell at me about. Yes?
If you don't add it the one that you don't want it to watch out, what happens? Watch out everything.
So if you don't add it that you want it to fail here, if you don't add that it'll fail, then it will report that there was an error, but just continue on as if nothing.
How about the source? Is that the source as a default? You have to put it there. If you forgot to say, okay, don't look at the public lib, because you said do not. Then what happened as a default?
So the reason that I added this not is because this earlier command will actually catch everything that's in the public library, in the public folder. So the public folder is inside the source folder, and so here I say in the source folder, look for all the folders in there and recursively add any JavaScript file. And so you could be a little bit more careful with how you passed in those glob patterns. But sometimes I found it's easier just to say target everything and don't care about some things. Yes?
All you're doing there is just sourcing those files that you need in your applications.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm just, the source command is going to grab any files that match these patterns and ignore any ones that don't, and then pipe them through any other task that that occurs.
But you'll need those files in the application.
Yeah. So these are all files. So these are all files that are in my application, and then these files are actually config files that aren't directly in the application, but they're ones that I still want to watch. You know, because if something happens, for example, to my JS hint configuration file, and it messes it up, then my whole JS hint linting process might not be reporting what I think it is. And so I want to make sure that I watch that I don't put any inaccurate stuff in there. So just real quick, I'm going to show you
Gulp is used for the testing?
Yeah, Gulp can be used to run can be used to run Karma, and there are also Jasmine plugins for Gulp that you can use to run those. Right now, I'm not later on. I'm going to Karma is also has a task runner built inside of itself just to run the tests, and so I'm just going to be using that as a task runner. But you could integrate that into Gulp as well. I just didn't want to spend like the entire time just configuring Gulp. But what this will do is, on the fly, it will look out for. So I'm going to show you exactly what. So both JS hint and JSRC will look for config files in your project directory where you set up rules, and you can. And I recommend starting with example files from other people and then going ahead and modifying those to suit your needs. This is this JS hint RC is built off of Douglas Crockford's style guide for JS hint. And then also down here in globals, I've modified it to say I've added Angular, describe it, and all these keywords as they're set as globals to false, and what that does is it prevents JS hint from thinking that I've set up a global variable. So for example, in this test file, you can see that right off the bat here it says describe. If I didn't have describe set up as a word that's okay to be a global, JS hint would say you're using a global variable, you're using a global function right there, you're using a global variable, that's very bad, and it would quit and prevent me from doing that. So if you are using libraries that expose globals that you don't want JS hint to lock onto, this is where you go ahead and modify that. And then pretty much for besides that, I really haven't had to make really any changes for my needs in this. And I will, with this project, I've got some links to a whole bunch of JS hint RCs and then also JS CS RCs as well. So we'll take a look real quick at the JS CSRC. And so this JSCS is for code style, so this isn't going to be looking for JavaScript mistakes that you're making, but it's going to enforce you to code in a certain way. So for example, this require curly braces rule would prevent me from using an if statement without adding the curly braces after it. And so different, that's not necessarily a right or a wrong thing. It's up for a team or a developer to decide. What it does do is it makes you use the same style throughout your whole project, which is really helpful, especially if you're working with a couple of developers, just to let everybody know, hey, we want all our files to look the same way. We don't want, it's just harder to catch errors when everybody's doing their own thing. So you can see one of the things that I've modified is just the maximum line length, because some of the Angular statements I like to let run a little bit longer from this example one. Also, like, you may want to require space after keywords, like to put a space in front of the parentheses or not, but that's just all stuff that's up to you. Okay, any questions on that? Yeah?
What was the line height?
I think it was 90, which was pretty short for me, I guess.
Are you doing the equivalent of like unit tests then here, or integration tests?
This is all before unit or integration tests. So what's going on right here is just JSHint and JSRC are monitoring my file every time it changes and just saying, like, are there syntax errors? Are semicolons in the right place? Are you using global variables where you shouldn't? Did you forget to put curly braces here? All stuff that doesn't have anything to do with your code functionality.
Unit testing for developers. Right? You're making sure your developers are making this.
It's just so easy when, especially, if you're just typing in a vanilla text editor, to just leave out, just leave out a semicolon, which won't hurt anything until it does.
Yeah.
Right?
Are you just using, we're just setting it up so that we start coding?
Yeah, this is supposed to guarantee that by the time that we're unit testing, our fundamental code is good, so that we're actually looking at, how our objects are behaving the way they're supposed to, not how does JavaScript work.
Oh.
Uh-huh.
I'm kind of embarrassed to say this, but I don't think I'll memorize all of that. So where can I look to find that if I can?
So yeah, both these, there are several different, especially for the JS-CSRCs, there are a ton of different options. And if you go ahead and just Google JS-CS, their GitHub page has Airbnb's style guide, Google's style guide, the Crockford style guide, and when we publish this, I'll have links to those example files, as well as the individual package web pages as well.
So there's also different libraries too, like JSHint,
CS.
There's another tool out there called ESLint that kind of marries the two of those guys together with less configuration as well, which is another alternative. Cool. There's a couple different alternatives out there that you can look at to see what you want.
Yeah.
Where do you publish this?
Where do we publish this?
We have a training blog. We can send out the links. Emails, did you guys get the email about how it was canceled or whatever? We send it out to those things that you guys receive the information.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll just do that. We'll follow up in the next week or two.
If you think you're not on the list or want to make sure you're on the list, I can leave out my notebook and we can have you write down some information or have you email somebody and figure it out. Okay, we cool so far? All right. So now we're going to move on to some actual unit testing here.
This is something you set up before you start coding, right?
Yeah.
Is it a framework?
I don't know if I would just make, I would call JSHint a linting tool, and I would call JSCS a code style tool. The actual runners that we're using are gulp plugins that implement the node packages JSCS and JSHint. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and take a look at Jasmine vanilla JavaScript testing. And the best way to get started with this is if you go to the Jasmine website, in their download section, they have a Jasmine standalone download. And what that lets you do is just downloads an archive file, and you can unzip it and open it up, and it has awesome stuff. And so the first thing I'm going to look at here is this spec runner file. So this is sort of what you need to get started with testing vanilla JavaScript with Jasmine. So it's just a HTML document, so nothing fancy here. I was really impressed with how slick this is to set up. And then these script sources here, we have the Jasmine dependencies. And when you download the Jasmine standalone, those are already in place, so you don't need to mess with these. And a great place to get started is just editing this document. And then next up, you would include any source files that you have. And these could be anything that's part of your project. And then after that, what you're going to do is you're going to include your test files. And that's pretty straightforward. Dependencies for Jasmine first, then your source files, and then your test files last. And just the only catch here is just make sure that you include stuff in the right order so that you don't get undefined errors from something expecting an object to exist that doesn't exist. Top to bottom. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're going to take a look at some of the examples of the test files that get downloaded as part of this standalone package, just as a way to run through how Jasmine tests get set up and some of the options that are available. So the first thing that I want you to pay attention to is this describe keyword. So all of Jasmine tests start out, tests are sweet, and start off with this describe keyword. And the first argument that it takes in is a name that's just a string, so it can be anything. Best to name it well. So this is my test suite example. And then the second argument is going to be a function. And then inside here, we can just start coding JavaScript. And basically what happens first, and just to let you know that we can nest these, you can nest these ad nauseum, so you can get as specific or not specific as you wish. Once you're inside this block, one of the main things that happens are people set up variables that are going to be used in multiple describe blocks or tests. And it's important, just because of JavaScript scope, that you declare those variables outside of these statements, because if you declare them inside the statements, then they're not going to be available once you jump down to the next test. This before each statement, it goes ahead and it runs once before each it block that exists in that layer of the describe block. So if you have a describe and then you have 3 its and 1 before each, that before each is going to run 3 times, once before each block. So that's a good way that you can set up and just make sure that your state is where you expect it to be when each test starts, and that you haven't polluted your objects through changing them with other tests. Okay, and yes?
Before each is reserved. It's not defined somewhere by you.
Sorry?
It's reserved.
Yeah, describe and before each and it and expect are all part of the Jasmine framework, Jasmine testing framework. There are lots of alternatives to Jasmine, and they'll have a slightly different way of setting up your tests, and they'll also have different keywords associated with them.
Where is an import for Jasmine found here?
Okay, so that's this specrunner.html, up here, you're going to make sure that you bring in all of the Jasmine dependencies, and then you're going to bring in next your source files and next your tests. And so when you run this, when you run these tests, all you're going to do is open up this HTML file in a browser. And so if you just think about it that way, where you're just including Jasmine, you're including your source files, and then you've got your tests, and then what's going to happen is Jasmine's going to get defined. It's going to expose all those expects, its, and before eaches and describes to you. Then you're going to, by including your source files, then you're going to have all the stuff that you need to test available to you as objects that you can bring in. And then finally, you're going to have your tests, and your tests are going to run and pick up what they need to from your source files and execute your assumptions.
Order is important.
Order is important there. In so much as if you include Jasmine after the tests, then when it tries to find that before each, it's going to fail and say, I don't know what the heck that is. And same thing, if your source files depend or have other source files as members, then you're going to need to get those in the right order, just that stuff. Cool?
I think it's important to note here that there are other ways to do this as well that can utilize something like CommonJS or ES6 imports, browser-defined webpack, to have that dependency tree more isolated to your individual script files, so you're not needing to have mental overhead to maintain here. But
yeah.
beyond scope of what he's trying to convey right here, it is possible.
Yeah, and yeah, you can set up any tool to sort of import and concatenate those so that you get exactly what you need in the right order without having to do it manually. Okay, so in this before each, what it does is it sets up a player object and a song object, and those are example objects that are included in the download from Jasmine. And then it starts executing some tests. And the way that these Jasmine tests work, it uses it keyword, and then you give it a descriptive string of what you want to test, and then the second argument is a function that is actually going to perform the test and then make assumptions and assertions based upon what happens. So you can see that here, this player.play song, we have so this will take the player variable, execute the play function with the song, and then this expect will say the player.currentlyplaying song will equal song. And if that's true, then the test will pass, and if it's false, then the test will fail. And Jasmine will let you know. Okay? And yes?
That song undefined, essentially in that describe section.
So I removed that from here, but that would have been in your source files. So if I ran, you can see that here I don't have this player spec included, but if I wanted it to, then I would include script source equals a source / player.js, and then down here I would include script source equals spec / player spec.js. Sorry?
Would the test have run without this?
No, it would not.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that what we're going to do is I'm actually going to run, I'm a little bit behind, so I'm going to run real quick into my Angular setup, and we're going to dip into that, and then we're going to come back to this and do some coding so that we can get an example of how we would go about writing some tests that would fail and then some tests that would pass, because I want to make sure that we at least touch on Angular stuff before it gets too late. Okay, so I've got here an Angular controller, and what it does is it's going to use the controller as syntax, and so it sets up a variable here, VM, standing for vModel, that is this. So that's how we're going to expose the controller object and its properties. And then I set a property on it called myProperty, which is an array with 3 elements. I set up a competitors array that is just sort of an empty array, and then we have a getCompetitors function, which is going to use a competitor service, which is going to return a promise. When that promise is resolved, it's going to return a result, and we're going to set the competitors array to be the result.data. And then I wanted to have a synchronous function as well. And so we have just a sort competitors function, and what that does is it just uses the competitor service to support the competitors from small to large. I also have another synchronous change my property that doesn't use the service. It just is a function that takes in a property and then resets the property. And at the end, I run the VM getCompetitors function to get some data. Okay. And so I'm going to go ahead and take a look at this competitor controller spec. Now this stuff gets a little bit complicated, but it's going to use the Jasmine fundamentals plus some functionality provided to us from Angular called ngMox, and that is going to manage the dependency injection of what Angular does. So for me, the biggest struggle in testing Angular is the wonderful dependency injection, right? We've got scope coming in, and we've got this competitor service coming in, and we need to find ways that we can mock those, and that can be a little bit tricky from time to time.
So, question, sorry. I see that you have scope as a dependency, but using the controller as syntax, you wouldn't use scope. So, are you just doing it for demonstration?
So when I'm exposing it I think that I was going to use the scope to watch some events, and I don't think I got that far. But I did want to make sure that, I mean, it's still going to be pretty likely that at some point in time you're going to need to mock scope, so I wanted to make sure that it's in there. Okay, so we've got here, the first thing that we do is that we're going to use this module is from ngMox, and that's going to allow us to bring in Bracket Manager, which is my application model. And I'm using the UI router to wire everything up. So it brings in my Bracket Manager module, which is going to give me all of my controllers and services available to test. So then, right here, what I do is I'm going to set up a couple of variables, competitor service and deferred. And then, next up, before each, we're going to use this module, which is going to inject the competitor service module with this provide is also provided to us from ngMox.
Where did you say the module comes from?
That's from ngMox.
It's an Angular module.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an Angular module. And this module is my application. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to set up a fake competitor service that we're going to be able to use inside this test, so that we don't have to rely on the actual competitor service to run our unit tests. And this $provide is also from ngMox. And so we just, here, we're going to create a competitor service, and I make sure that the competitor service object has get and sort competitors small to large. Those are both the only methods that I'm using in the competitor controller. And so I just need to make sure that both of those are available if I want to mock them. And this .provide.value then returns my competitor service object as the competitor service module. So it's kind of just creating a fake Angular module with some stubbed out methods or functions that don't really do anything, so that when I try to say, start up my competitor controller, it doesn't yell at me because it says, I don't have the things that I need to do my job. Okay? So, and you could do all of this in one before each, but I felt like it was a little bit easier. I had a ton of problems setting this up where being like, oh, like now this isn't working. And until the once the actual tests run, Jasmine is really good about giving you very descriptive error messages that are easy to follow. But if the initial thing is blowing up, then it can be a little bit, it just sort of says like, oh, there's a module that I didn't find. Could have been anything. So I split it up to make it a little bit easier to see what's going on. Okay, so then we're going to set up what the service is actually doing. My competitor service returns a promise. And so this deferred is going to bring in the queue library, which is a promise library that Angular uses, and it's going to get the value of the defer. And then we're going to replace the competitor service that it expects with the mocked competitor service. And then I'm going to use this Spion is a Jasmine thing that lets us watch when these watch when our stubbed out methods will be called and see how many times they're called and stuff like that. Okay, and so finally we set up our actual controller, and this we pass in the root scope and the controller.
What's that inject?
Inject is this inject comes from ngmocks, and the traditional Jasmine syntax would be something like before each, and then we'd have, and then just a function would run. But what inject does is it allows us to hijack Angular's dependency management, and it's provided to us from the ngmocks. And so it just piggybacks right in front of that function.
That's what enables you to get root scope and controller into service.
Mm-hmm. So our competitor controller is created here as an honest-to-goodness Angular controller, and it gets a scope and our mocked service. So then we actually get into some of our tests. And so the first thing we're going to do is just test the state here. So if we look at competitor controller, it sets up a property called myProperty that's an array. And we're just going to run through some of the things you can do with Jasmine. So here, I misspelled that. So we want to make sure that after we wired everything up, that we actually have the properties in our controller and they're behaving the way that we're supposed to. So we're finally doing some testing. And so we have competitor controller.myProperty to be defined. We want to make sure that it exists. And then Angular has some helper methods. So we can say angular.isArray, and we expect that to be true. And also, we expect its length to be 3. We had that change my property function where you just pass in, it just accepts an argument and then sets the my property to be that argument that's passed in. And so we expect competitor controller.myProperty to be true. And we expect that this array will be defined and for the length to be equal, and run through this stuff. And so, I don't know, at least for me, I felt like the actual test running is pretty straightforward and simple, so long as you avoid doing things like using jQuery to directly manipulate the DOM. If you're coding in Angular the way that Angular expects you to, then the tests stay pretty straightforward. Several of the Angular projects that I'm on set up controllers and services completely differently, and I felt like that is where you can get yourself into a little bit of a pickle, where depending upon how the stuff is wired up, what kind of router they're using, you may run into troubles. Okay. Real quick, I want to go over how these tests actually run in Angular. And so Karma is a test runner. So all that Karma does is makes browsers available to you and then runs whatever test and framework, assuming it's supported by Karma, inside of it, and then reports on you. Karma looks for another configuration file, this karma.conf.js, and it's actually, it looks complicated, but if you run npm install karma and then type in karma init, then it guides you through the whole process and creates this file for you. And the most important thing that I found was this files array. And so this is going to be the equivalent of those source includes that we looked at on the spec runner HTML page. And these just need to be, once again, in the right order. So if you put Angular root out of order with angular.js, you can run into some troubles. This browsers just indicates which browsers you want your code to run in. So they support Firefox and IE and Phantom and a whole slew of them. Once this karma.conf.js file is in place,
Yeah,
oh, right here.
I think it must be up
Oh.
or something.
I can't. I can.
Scroll up.
I see the comments.
It's all documented on the Karma's website.
I just put it up there for you so you can see it. I think just the but all of that is provided to you when you run the karma init command. It asks you what browsers and it tells you what browsers you want to include and tells you what browsers are available. And then once you give an example of what stuff looks like. Yeah, I'm going to bring it up. Once that's running, you can fire that off with Karma test or npm test, and then it'll give you a list of what tests succeed and which ones fail. Yes?
Does it literally open the browser and run stuff? Or can it...
Yeah. Yeah, which can be helpful because then you can see how your JavaScript is going to run in whatever implementation of ECMAScript is provided, and make sure that that IE and Firefox and Chrome and everything all play nice. Okay, so I'm going to try to jump back in over to the vanilla JavaScript and give some examples of just coding through some of these real quick in the last 9 or 10 minutes here, because I really wanted to do some of that. Okay, so over here, let's see. I want to give you some simple examples. Okay, so here's just a function that an object that I created, just a little fighter, and when it's constructed, it gets a series of attributes: dexterity, skill, stamina, strength, and it just sets those to be their attributes. And I wanted them to be able to fight, and basically I just return or set a fight result to be their little stat plus a fight mod, kind of like what would happen in an RPG or something like that. Fight mod is just a random number that's set up between 1 and 20, just to simulate the d20 die, and then fight total returns just the total of all those, so that we could eventually try to figure out how compare fight totals and see who won stuff. So this should be a little bit easier to see just kind of how the basics of how Jasmine works. So we start out and we're testing this fighter object. And so we start up with the describe and we say this is our fighter, and then we set up fighter, dexterity, skill, stamina, strength, and fight mod. Then before each, we're going to create some static values for each of these skills and create a new fighter with those attributes. Then our first test is going to just run through 10,000 times generating a fight mod and just guaranteeing that it's never greater than 21 and it's never a negative number. Then we want to make sure that they're able to fight, and fighting works the way that we expect. So we use the generate fight mod, and then we run the fight, and then we just expect then this fight result.dexterity to equal what we know the fight result.dexterity should equal, which is this fight mod plus dexterity. We run through that for each of those. Here, we just check and see that the get fight total is equal to this fight mod times 4, because it gets added four times once for each of these stats, plus the value of each of these stats. And then we want to make sure that after the fight that the core stats are the same, so we don't want to change that. And I'll show you what that looks like. So you can see in the spec runner, that's where I'm including this fighter file, which had my JavaScript source in it, and then the test is the test that we just ran through. And let's see. I'm going to go ahead and just open that in. So you can see this is what the Jasmine test looks like when tests pass. And if you want to rerun a single test, you can just click on it, and it said it just ran one. Or you can click up here to run them all. I'm going to alter this fighter spec test, or actually even better, we're going to alter the fighter. So let's say for some reason this dexterity equals this. So now we should be setting the dexterity property of the core object to be the modded one, which is what we don't want to have happen. And go ahead. Yeah, I'm not sure. There we go. So it tells us specifically that the fighter should not change base attributes after fight. And so that's the string that I passed in as here. So if it fails, it gives me that message so I know what I expected to happen, and so long as I was honest with myself when I wrote that, that should be very helpful. And then it says exactly why the test failed. It said it expected 5 to equal 2. And that's because our core dexterity stat when the test began and the before each was set to 2. And after we ran the fight mod, or after we ran this fight, that we actually altered the core stat. Okay? So that's probably about most of the time we had. So any questions?
You said when you ran these with Jasmine, all you had to do was open up the spec runner page.
Yeah, so that's all I did right here was just specrunner.html is set to open with Chrome by default. So that's not even running in a web server or anything. It's just ready to go.
Now Karma will just run these automatically.
Karma will run those automatically, and you can actually set it up to watch so that anytime they change, it'll rerun. Just for the vanilla JavaScript, I just wanted to include only the Jasmine framework. The Jasmine docs, the Karma docs are really good, I think, and there's tons of stuff that you can do with this. And so, thank you very much for your time.
Do you know if you're going to set up another one of this, or is it still a discussion?
We're still kind of in the planning phases. I think we're going to move to CSS frameworks next, like Bootstrap and Foundation and CSS3, some of those things. So we'll send out an email when we get those kind of figured out.
Cool. Got a question?
Yeah.
JavaScript and JavaScript. So, question on Go. And